I just keep, we need to change the music because I'll just start every podcast giggling away like a
I know.
child.
I feel like I'm always wiggling on my chair. Well, happy Tuesday. Happy morning. If you're in the morning right now, you're live with us. Happy New Year. Happy 2024. And we personally want to say thank you because today's episode, along with going live on Facebook and YouTube, is also going live on our LinkedIn page because we've reached our first goal of 150 followers on LinkedIn, so we can actually broadcast live to our page. So that's really that's for the win for us, an early win in 2024. If you are just tuning in or if you're new here, welcome to Getting to Unstuck. We are a live cast 20-minute conversation with 3 coaches. We are from Whole Human Coaching, and every episode we are always continuing to focus on how we can reclaim our humanity through life and work. And today is Teamwork Tuesday. And on Tuesdays, we are always focusing on what it looks like to lead a team, to be a part of a team, and to understand how we can do better as teams, in particular around the areas of reclaiming our humanity, which is a big theme and which is why we do what we do. So today we're going to be talking about the perfect or the ultimate cocktail for teams. Carol and Colin, this has been fun as we've been preparing for this. It's been fun to think about it. So we're talking about how to pull together a recipe for teams that's good for the individual and good for the team. So a team may be made up of individuals, but those individuals are part of a whole too. So when those team members feel alone in a journey, even if it's us as individuals, everyone pays the price. But it is possible for our team's dynamics to be about a true balance. So let's talk about that. Who wants to weigh in first on what we mean when we're talking about the ultimate cocktail for teams?
Well, I think
maybe we should
when
describe...
we had...
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, over to you, Colin.
We need a buzzer.
I just think we should like the Price is Right thing. We should probably define what we mean by a cocktail, right? Like I think what's we're not sort of promoting drinking on the job, but the idea is that mixologists, right, when they're putting together a recipe or a cocktail, are very, very careful about the ingredients, about the measurements, about the cadence in which you're making it and all that stuff. So the idea is that when we speak about the cocktail, it's treating your team as an organic living being, not as a group of individuals that are living, hopefully living, and alive on the team and working, but that ensemble, that wholeness that you've just put together is much bigger than the sum of the parts. So that's really what we mean by what's the mixology? How did you mix it? What's going in there? And it's recognizing that it's alive.
It is. And it's also recognizing the components of it and how each one is important and how it also needs to be settled sometimes. Sometimes when you're mixing a beautiful cocktail, it's that very fine, subtle piece that you add at the end that actually makes it brilliant and wonderful, that blends all the rest of it together. So it is looking at what are the individual ingredients of a cocktail of the team, but also really recognizing that each one has a value and a place in it. And the recipe can change depending on the situation. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think also when, because the reason that we are focusing on this month in particular comes out of a couple things. Number one, it comes out of last week, we were introducing a simple word that is, that people may not have heard of before, but it's the concept of degrowth, which does not mean to diminish in any way. That we don't want people to get caught up in that, but it's the idea of actually tuning in and discovering not what just works, but what works for everyone, and that brings up everyone in the process, in particular in the workplace, which is what our conversation is around on Tuesdays with Teamwork Tuesdays. And Colin, back in December, we had brought into our conversation and we'd introduced the idea of micro missions and what that could look like. So if you're hearing about this for the first time, you can look back in one of our December episodes on if you're on a podcast player or anywhere that our episodes are listed. We talked about things that make it important, what that team determines as important. But really, as today, we're building on that, because can you help us first just establish what we talked about with micro missions, so we can build on that today in our conversation?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of a micro mission is really to fine tune a larger sort of corporate or enterprise mission that you've got for the whole organization, and it's to fine tune it and define one that meets the sort of the exact needs of your team, of the individuals that are in that well, obviously in that team, right? So a micro mission is, you may be part of something much greater, but your team has a specific set of objectives and has a precise role, and it might have its own challenges. So the idea is that to create that tighter cultural cohesion, if you can write a micro mission that is specific to you guys, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 people, then you can create really both cohesion around it and adherence to it, and everybody's kind of pulling from, or they should be pulling from and singing from, the same song sheet. And I think it's important for organizations that are growing and changing, that are dynamic, and that might have different departments that have very, very different skill sets and requirements and things like that. So the idea is to tailor make something specifically for your team and their needs and their requirements.
And I think as people are listening to this, whether you are a team member or whether you're the leader of a team, it is looking at, the word that we used was confluence. So it's putting things together. So there's the intention of who we are as individuals, but who we work for. That is a possibility of creating something that feels like it has value in going to work every day, in having that sense of belonging with the group of people that you work with most closely. And that's where that micro mission has such power, is that it is personalized to the people who are working in that smaller group.
Right. And I think it helps the micro mission. And as we're talking today around this, thinking about what that cocktail looks like, there is, we're kind of coming out of a long chapter of when we will look back on our human history, of where we've had like almost the cult of the individual, where it was about your individual, at all costs, and looking out for number one. Like that's a phrase that as soon as you hear that, everybody knows what that refers to. But yet now, as we're collectively starting to stop and say, wait a minute, is that really all that there is? There has to be more. And we're starting to recognize that in ourselves, that there is a loneliness in that individualism, and in that addiction to growth that gets in the way of teams.
It not only gets in the way of teams, but it also gets in the way of your health, right?
Yes,
and if you look at the data around mental health, even just here in Canada, the numbers are staggering, right? So to me, I think to all of us here, the fact that, in the age range from 18 to 24, 33% of them have anxiety or depression, 25% have anxiety, and 15% have PTSD. Okay. So those numbers change quite dramatically if we're talking about an LGBT community or we're talking about an Indigenous community. Loneliness ramps up to almost 60% for people that are 50 and above. Okay. These are data from last year in Canada. So I think we all think that we're dealing with a crisis of meaning in this world, and that individualization and this sort of the cult of separation that we've had for the past 50 years. I mean, I know I certainly grew up in the me sort of optics and learning, but I think that the data is telling a different story, and even things around addiction and aggression, the numbers are pretty awful. I mean, 20% of the population in Canada is going to have addiction in their lifetime. And right now, depending on which community is, between 17 and 25% of Canadians are dealing with addiction. So what's wrong? There's something wrong. right?
Yes.
There's something going on.
It is a wellness
And-
issue. The statistic I read yesterday was that social isolation, particularly in older adults, has the
Mhm.
same physical effect as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It can
Right.
shorten your life to
Whoa.
the same extent.
Oh
So
my
we are
goodness.
speaking of a health crisis and a
Yeah.
well-being crisis. And it plays out most often in the workplace, where
Yes.
people are enforced to be with others,
Mhm.
whether we're in a virtual office, a hybrid office, or we're back in person.
Mhm.
And yet we feel like we don't have any place that we belong or people we belong with.
Yeah.
That's right. So that's why it's so important for leaders today to understand, I think, and contextualize what's going on in the world, because all
Mhm.
of that data that we just spoke about, people are coming to the office in that state of mind, right?
Yes.
So
Right.
so if you've got, 30 or 40% of your team coming to
Mhm.
work with these kind of challenges,
Mhm.
something's got to change.
Yeah.
Or at a minimum, I think leaders need to be aware of this individualized crisis of meaning that we're having. And go ahead, Carol.
Well, I was just going to say, let's shift and look at it from that other perspective, because there are, and we know we've worked with teams where they feel like they have relationship, where they feel like they have a place to belong. And so what happens and what is created then when you know that these 8 hours a day, 5 days a week are
Right.
with people that you really appreciate, something shifts and it becomes that other side. We begin to
Right.
see the possibility of admiring the leader that you're working for, of feeling like you're pulling together in the same direction.
Mhm.
That sense of we are working on something worthwhile together. So just in that, I know the work that you're doing, Colin, with the organization that we're working with,
Mhm.
just in beginning that conversation, what shifted in the leader that you spoke with?
It was this idea of togetherness, I think, is
Mm,
probably the best word,
Mm.
as opposed to sort of separated anxiety, separated sort of fatigue, bringing old stories to the equation. And in
mhm,
this instance that we're talking about, it's an organization, or it's a team within the organization that's growing quickly, very quickly.
mhm,
So they're
mhm.
having to bring a lot of new people onto a team that has a pretty difficult job in dealing with external relations and client relations and things like that.
Mhm.
And what the leader recognized was he needed to not have the old stories and the negativity and the stressors coming in with
Mhm.
all of these new people arriving, because that would infect the new arrivals and could really create
Yeah, for
kind of
sure.
a time bomb, right, for
Yeah.
teams.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
So we're dealing with there's two different pieces here that I'm hearing. One is there will be growth in organizations. There will be growth in enterprises.
Mhm.
And so this is a bit about how are we growing and incorporating a little bit of the principles of degrowth into growing, which seems like a conflict. It seems like it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. And yet, when we look at those principles of degrowth, they are exactly what you're talking about applying in this idea of the micro mission, Colin.
Yeah. Yeah.
well, I mean,
Mm.
it's about really connecting to what you're doing as a collective, right?
Mm.
Right.
Mhm.
And so often a mission and a vision of a larger organization may seem a bit ethereal to somebody coming in and feeling a bit of the grind and the pressures and the stressors.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
the idea of a micro mission is really about reimagining the relationship that you can have with your colleagues, the
Mhm.
relationship that you can have with your clients externally, and the
Mhm.
relationship that you can have with the rest of the business.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah, that's really the
Well,
period.
And that creates that sustainability that we're talking about.
Right, right.
Because the other piece that we were speaking of, in our preparation for this conversation was that one of the things that happens with leaders, and it's a logical thing, is, well, we'll throw a workshop in there,
yeah.
or
Mm,
we'll all go on a retreat, or we'll create something
A
that we
team
can do
building
team
exercise.
with, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that works for a minute.
Mhm.
But Christal, you were saying what helps follow up?
Yeah. So this is such an interesting thing, because this is where we have that opportunity to decide, am I reclaiming as a leader, am I reclaiming the humanity in this situation, or am I going to do business as usual? So a team building workshop or event or anything like that, they're actually really great, right? There's lots of really great ones. I've personally participated in them. However, I've also participated in them when my team was not healthy at the core, and there was a lot of performative stuff in there. And so I think that the opportunity here for leaders to think about yes, we need those events, because those are ways that we can celebrate and grow, and everybody loves the live events. But where are the subtle ways, in thinking of the cocktail again, when you're like, something is missing, and if I just add this, it's going to be, it's going to be really great, or if it's a recipe or whatever you're thinking about. People are obviously more than recipes, but where is it that we can draw on wisdom that's maybe not being used? So where are strengths in the team members that we have not, either that have not been recognized, or that if I am the leader, how have I been investing my time into observing how people are showing up? Like, am I really creating space and opportunity for them to show up in that place? Because then anything that I do is going to be building off of something that is already a foundation of a desire to be whole, to reclaim what's possible there.
I think it's also a question of, those workshops and those retreats and things like that are intersections in time, right? Time and space, and they last for a finite period of time. And I think what we're suggesting is, how can you bring the feeling that you have, because often those events and those retreats are incredible, right? And there's an incredible buzz, and then you go home and you're like, oh, well, back to normal, right? So I think what we're advocating is can you make this, and I think we're saying we can you bring those moments in time and those intersections throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year, so that your team is constantly on that that different level of connection to each other.
Oh, yes. Those are the ingredients you want to bring back into the workplace.
Right.
Those very ones that
Exactly.
leave you feeling refreshed and enlivened is exactly what needs to be brought into the workplace. So that sense of camaraderie, that sense of building something together, that opportunity to be vulnerable in a space that feels safe, bringing pieces of that back into a micro mission, into the traction that you can do from those retreats and workshops. It is often what we have experienced. It is where coaching comes in, because it builds on what you already know.
And a micro mission is alive. And I think what we're trying to say here is that the cultural cohesion and connection and bringing humanity back into the workplace and the workforce and to teams is alive, and it's always got to stay alive. And one of the things that we're doing with the micro mission for that organization we mentioned is having a monthly sit down, a monthly circle where everybody connects, where much like a confidential coaching call, it's or a brainstorm, right? No idea is bad, and it's all confidential, and everybody can share, and it's a safe space to keep that alive. I think what we're really advocating is taking the goals off of the wall and turning them into something that's organic and real and alive. And if leaders can recognize that, that's a huge first step.
Yes.
Also
that they're living people. So that these goals on the wall they're not just words, they are going to impact people's lives. And if we look at how carefully we craft them, and then we bring them into a space where we can feel that we can own them, we've got a much bigger possibility of realizing those goals.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we have 1 minute left, and I would love to hear from each of you. If a leader was to ask, and we know that coaching is not about advice, so this is not necessarily about advice. But I am curious, if you were in a conversation and you were either mentoring someone or coaching them, what is one thing that you would want to offer them, or that you have recognized as a really great tool for them to use to start to pull out those different elements in their team that maybe they might not have recognized before?
Well, I can go first, Colin, if you like. What I invite leaders to do is to look at who they haven't heard from. Consider the voice that may not have been the strongest or the loudest. Listen and provide space for someone who may not have provided a great deal of contribution yet. See what they're thinking.
Yeah, I would really just expand on that and say the secret is in what's not being said, right? And that awareness of the struggle of humanity outside of the doors of your office needs to be taken into account. So listen to who's not, like, what's not being said, who's not saying it, who's not speaking up, who's not being heard. So it's a question of you as a leader kind of taking your ego and putting it aside for later, right? And
and I resonate with both of those thoughts, and I would say along the same theme, to listen to learn, not to listen to hear, not to be heard, because there's a time for all those things. And wisdom says that there's a lot that we can be learning. People are wanting to teach us all the time if we're willing to learn. Well, thank you. This was another fantastic conversation. Thanks for joining us from wherever you are, whether you are in your car, you are on the treadmill, or you're doing life. Whenever you're listening to this episode, we're just really glad that you joined us. We're here every Tuesday. You can find us as we talk about teamwork on Teamwork Tuesdays. And if you have liked this episode, please share it, leave a comment. We want to hear from you. If there are other things that you would like us to cover, please let us know. We would really appreciate hearing from you and hearing what is important to you right now. And until the next time, we hope you have a fantastic day and week ahead. Thanks for joining.
Take good care.
Be human.
Be human.